All right, so here we are. Farhan is white this game. And we've got a Philidor defense from black. And here with h3, a passive move from white. Definitely don't want to play that move. You should be developing your bishop or playing d4. Like that, d4, very good. Now you see in this position that h3 is not particularly important. Normally you wouldn't want to trade this pawn for this pawn because this pawn gives you more space than this one. This pawn is blocking his bishop and this one isn't blocking yours. That's the entirety of the, that's like the main part of the extra space at the moment. You know, this pawn's also kind of keeping this knight off some squares, whereas this pawn's keeping your knights off some more ambitious squares that you're less likely to use at the moment. Oh, I'm running out of throat today, sorry. But the main thing is the bishop being blocked by this pawn. So when you early trade these pawns, you allow your opponent, you know, freedom of use and development for this bishop, as well as allowing knight c5. So that's why it's preferable to play like, you know, bishop e2 or bishop e3 in this position and just keep developing. You could also potentially play bishop c4. Also might be okay. You will see people sometimes make this trade, but they'll only make it when they feel either forced to do it because of a threat from black of playing ed4 and then winning your pawn on the e-file, or when they feel like they've accomplished enough with their space advantage that they're ready to engage in some kind of positive operation, like trade, and then use the d-file or something, because their extra space let them double up already and black hasn't. So they'll play de5 when they're ready to do some positive operation, but not just at random like this. I'm not impressed by the style of playing both of these moves. I see this one has some purpose now because with b5, you know, you're looking for some flexibility for your bishop. With the knight and pawn here, you can't like retreat this way. So the only way to keep your bishop out of the way of this kind of pawn storm is to have a2 available. So a3 is not a terrible move at all. But I would just say you want to really limit how many of these kinds of moves you're making. You know, even if sometimes it's correct to make one of those moves, the fact that you're playing both of those in the first couple moves of the game is very concerning to me, that you're not playing them because there's like a good reason or something, but that you just play these moves all the time just because you don't realize that there's a cost to wasting your time. But there is. There is. And as you play better and better, you will be less and less inclined to waste your time. As your opponents are playing better and better, you'll start to pay sometimes for having wasted time. Okay, so knight c5, rook e1. Now reposition with knight e6. Here I would think like bishop e6 kind of makes sense for black, developing this piece. And it also makes a3 kind of a wasted tempo, right? Because now, after these are traded, there was never any reason to have played a3. And now the knight comes here, hits this, rook d8's coming, and you can move the bishop to c5. So black has a very, very comfortable position here. Yeah. So bishop e6 would have been good. Knight e6 not as good, blocking this piece. Bishop e3, rook d8, queen e2. So at least he makes logical use of his knight e6 move. It's a plausible way to play. All right. Yeah, I think when he comes here, you have to figure out what you want to do about knight f4. You don't really want to trade this bishop. You don't really want to allow the knight to be on f4. You have to decide whether or not to play g3 or play around this piece. You don't really want to play bishop e6 either in order to stop knight f4. You don't want to do anything that just gives up the bishop pair here, like for nothing. What you played is pretty clever as far as playing around it, like trading a rook before these rooks are coordinated, and then thus being able to play like not a bad move with your queen. I think that if you didn't trade rooks, like if you didn't arrange this rook trade in time and have queen d2 and you had to tuck your queen on f1, I would not be very happy about the queen on f1 in this position here. It just seems a little bit like committed. I mean, basically it's a tactical element. It's a piece that can't move. But even just like strategically, it means you can't reposition and adjust to changing circumstances with this queen very well. Your other major option would have been to play g3. But then there's this move, which refutes g3. It's basically attacking these things and attacking this, right? So the new tactical element after g3 is that this piece is now a little bit shakier defended and this piece is undefended. So just knight d4 and it's unlikely that this somehow works out for white. Yeah, as far as the question of why not trade bishop for knight, a pair of bishops is better than a bishop and knight overall if there's no special circumstances. And certainly there are examples in this pawn structure where there's some maneuvering going on and the knight is better than the bishop or as good as, and it's fine to make that trade. But like this early on to do it for just no reason, like this position here, like you just take like this for white, it's just not a good position, right? I mean, black's just got the bishop pair. You're not doing anything. Your knight's not well placed, right? It's completely dominated by this pawn. It's not headed to an outpost. It's not tying black to defending e5. It's not placing any pressure. It's just not good for you. And similar with, you know, if you just give up this bishop randomly, you know, black's position is completely sound. You're not doing anything. And, oh yeah, knight takes d4. Good call. Yeah, I mean, white's just not doing anything, and therefore black has this advantage of the two bishops, which is just a long-term advantage for him. Infen points out an important tactical point, which is that here white can play knight d4 instead of bishop d4, purposely getting these pieces attacked, and then the queen's able to come here. So then he's able to get this pawn back and threaten f7, and this whole tactic doesn't actually work for black. So tactically, you actually can play g3, and knight d4 gets punished by this undefended piece on h5. So that means that technically g3 might be playable. Yeah. I mean, even still, black might be able to play this move with the point of pawn takes, pawn takes. Now, if you play a move like knight g5, I'm not sure what happens. It's messy. Yeah, I mean, we'd have to calculate to know if this stuff is good or bad. I played this move here, might be really important. We're maintaining this threat and idea of like rook g6 if they take here. And you know, if we force this bishop here, for example, or maybe c5 is a better move, but whatever. The point is we're going to come here. They can't take on g5 because of rook g6. So we force the queen back. And then as planned, we're able to get this pawn over here with an attacking position, right? Two pawns for a piece and attacking potential against the king. And that's the same idea at the very beginning here, is that if white just retreats, right, my idea is to kind of take this and create a position with two pawns against a piece and some kind of attack on that side of the board. I'm not sure it's convincing or not, but that's a sort of a strategic possibility to always watch out for black playing this based on the weakness of these pawns. Anyway, it looks like g3 was kind of an option, but I prefer what you did. To me here, g3 looks a little bit shaky on the king side. So rook d1, knight f4, trade, and then move the queen to the d file. And now you're sort of fighting it back against this, but also coming to this file. So bishop f6 makes sense. And now b4. I don't know the point of this move. Right. Yeah, you make good use of the d file here. I was surprised by what he did. I was thinking that here, that he, with or without b5, I probably, oh, I see the reason for b5 kind of. But I thought that basically he was just going to put his rook on d8. And the position is playable for both sides. Close to equal. Yeah. So anyway, so he goes for this a5 thing, emphasizes it. You emphasize the d file meanwhile, so each doing something different. Comes in with d6, and now this is the move I don't like running away and ceding control from you. I'll just show you what feels like the right kind of way to play, even though it might fail tactically. It feels right to trade, take here. I assume he takes back. And then maybe try bishop e7, sacking this. I mean, it might be that you can play bishop b7 or something, but let's just look at this real quick. At least a kind of a forcing sequence of events. Bishop b4. If knight here, bishop here. White keeps the extra pawn and actually holds some advantage still. Don't they? Well, let's see. Here, and this, right? Saves the knight with a tactic. Well, but now this one, huh? And this one. It's all very long. That's one of the reasons Siddhartha. It's also because they can't move, right? Siddhartha's saying that he's realizing that two doubled pawns are pieces that can never defend each other. Also, in general, one of them will interfere with the mobility of the one behind them. And since they're not next to each other, they can't attack the square in front of them. So it's easy for the opponent to control the square in front of doubled pawns and then prevent both of them from moving. So doubled pawns, the biggest thing they suffer from is actually mobility, and then the second thing is being undefended. And that affects them both strategically and tactically. Okay, so this thing doesn't seem to quite work out for black. So I may have been optimistic about that. And what if he goes here, here? It seems like he can't quite trap this rook either, because it can get out on a7. Seems like this stuff doesn't quite exactly work out for your opponent. So yeah, maybe he just needs to trade and then play this move here, just keeping things defended. Seems okay. You can come here, but he could respond like this. You can't go to c7 because of the knight. So you might... I don't see how you make progress with rook d7 immediately. So this seems potentially playable for you. And I mean, for your opponent, for defending against what you were doing. He could also trade like this. If knight takes, then this move is a problem. So he'd have to take here. You could try e5. You also have bishop takes e6 now. Actually, you were definitely bothering him a bit. So e5, bishop. If bishop e7, you have rook d7. The double attack. So now you need to get fancy if black's trying to survive here. So if takes, then takes. You can't take it because of rook to d7, and then after knight e5, black loses this endgame. The plan is just rook d7, knight g6. Okay, so this is not that easy for black at all. You're by the time you're playing queen d6, he has messed around too long with a5 and then this h6 follow-up. I didn't even comment on this, but this was a really bad move. I mean, that's just a complete wasted move. If he's planning to do something with this a5 thing, then, you know, how much longer does he want to wait around on that, right? Play bishop e7 here. Target that. You can play f6 to reinforce e5 if you need to later, maybe. Just play king f8. There's nothing going on with this g5 thing, right? So he's committing the same sin as you, this like a3, h3, h6 thing. This is just really a bad loss of tempo. And now queen d6, actually, this hurts him. So he tries to hang on by not trading queens. I can certainly understand how he might not have found his way through trading queens, but now you win a pawn while attacking another one. And he's in desperate need of some kind of tactical saving here, but it doesn't look like it's coming. These are also suddenly tactically weak, right? If you like consider the bad tactical elements for black, how they change with this one move knight e5, right? Suddenly this is like barely defended, right? They're in contact with this key square, and this is barely defended. Oh, sorry, is now undefended, right? 2-to-1 attackers to defenders, and it's also the defender for this piece. So it's like with that one move knight e5, black not only lost a pawn, but instead of white then being exposed after taking the pawn, in this exceptional case, white was capturing kind of a linchpin for black's position, and suddenly black's position is tactically much worse even than it was the move before. He responds with rook a3, which does like stone nothing, as far as I can tell. I don't even see like an idea. He's like, I could take your knight if you move your bishop, but then don't move your bishop. It seems like knight takes c6 would be good here. Maybe bishop takes f4 could be good here. What can go wrong for you? Because you played knight to b1 as if he had a threat here. But what happens if you take? It was kind of one of your major threats. You can go here. And you take this. Check. If king f8, you've got mate in 2. So let's assume that he plays king h7. And now, yeah, you've got some hanging things. You could play bishop b3 to just hold them, but let's calculate this for a second. What if you just threaten mate in 1? What is black doing here? See, your threats were really quite significant. You were getting ready to like knock this guy out like completely, and rook a3 ignored it, and then you didn't do it. I doubt there's a move for black here. So yeah, this move is really just completely ignoring the fact that you were ready to do stuff. I mean, there's also no reason you couldn't have just taken on c6 probably. Is there? Is it this piece? I see. If knight takes, then bishop c3. And if queen takes, then bishop e5. And these are defended. All right, so you can't just take on b5, it seems like. Although I think bishop f4 is probably still winning here. So, I mean, you could, but the simplest is just bishop f4. That's the winning move. The point isn't that knight c6 is winning because you could still play bishop f4 after. This is like the clear winning move that you missed here. And then after knight b1, rook to a6. Again, bishop f4 is going to win just the same as before. Yeah, just the same as in my previous variation. This will just end the game right here. If he takes on f4, you take on f7 and checkmate him. And if he takes on e5, you move the bishop over here and you're up a piece. Maybe there's some move to calculate here, but okay, there is this move. Yeah, there is this move. So actually, knight b1, rook a6 has improved his defensive chances a little bit here. And the best you can do now, it's kind of messy. It might be something like knight f7, takes, and then maybe queen d7 keeps the game going for the moment. Yeah, again, your knight's not great on b1. I guess maybe something like e5, bishop here, and takes. Something like this might be what you do. Or perhaps taking without e5. But this is definitely somewhat messy now for sure. So actually bishop f4 is not as clear because of c5 now. Okay, so rook a6. So that's annoying. Yeah, that's a bit of a problem. So knight g4 might be very wise here. Creating some space for your queen maybe. So let's say they play c5 though now, which he didn't. What are you prepared to do? I guess taking can't hurt. And now looks like your queen is low on squares. And on something like that, now your bishop's low on squares. You see, this rook a6 actually, like, strangely gives him some serious tactical counterplays. You know, and you might be able to still muddle your way through this somehow and have some variation that doesn't lose for you. But it's actually, this is quite dangerous for you. Like, you're in danger of just losing instantly here. Because you've only won one pawn so far, and he's just sort of trapping your queen and your bishop. Yeah, very bad situation. So you actually need something really good here after rook a6. Maybe the only good move is bishop c5 to stop c5. This is an example of like realizing that you've got like a real problem in terms of like your queen being low on squares, right? Like what squares does your queen have right now? D2, like one single square, right? And your bishop, what squares does it have? Absolutely zero, other than maybe trading here. So recognizing here that you have some bad tactical elements, you actually play a restraining move. You prevent c5, and now this hidden attack of the rook on your queen is dealt with. At the same time, your queen's lack of squares to move to becomes less important, and your bishop's lack of squares becomes less important because there's no longer c4. So this might actually surprisingly, even though your bishop wants to take here, this might surprisingly be your only really good answer here. And then, you know, imagine he takes and you take, and now there's threat on f7. Actually, I wonder if like knight c5, you have bishop f7. That might win, which might prevent knight c5 actually. Queen takes, knight takes is not enough. King moves, queen f8, and again, he can't really cover g8. So this is a real problem for him. So actually, this is the right move. You just cut off this tactic, leave the pawn here, blocking his piece. And now your opponent's in trouble. Again, you've got time to bring your knight back into the game, probably. A tricky move to find, but actually kind of necessary, this move, dealing with your own tactical problems. So you go knight g4. He misses the chance to turn the game around with c5. Plays bishop e7 instead, avoiding knight f6 check. queen e5, takes b4, bishop takes f4. Now suddenly you're up a piece. What can he do here? He needs to save this piece. Could have played knight g6 before taking on b4. Or could have played maybe, it's very risky, but f6, trying to chase your queen off. f6 is bad though. I bet it's kind of bad. I think knight g6 has got to be right. He doesn't have the e5 pawn, so this knight's kind of a liability now as a very, very poorly defended piece, very barely. So he just leaves it hanging, and you take it, and then he loses, yeah. So it seems like a straightforward win by you on the surface, but there's actually a very important trade of tactical opportunities right around here with rook a3. First of all, you can just finish your opponent with bishop f4 if you don't worry about this and think properly aggressively. But secondly, once you just basically take your knight out of the game, a huge portion of your advantage is dissipated by this bad retreat. And suddenly now you need to deal with your bad tactical elements, and you didn't. And with two bad moves like that, knight b1, knight g4, you could basically be in huge trouble with c5. But instead, your opponent misses that chance and then hangs the knight on f4. So you make a pair of mistakes, handing him a way to totally come back into the game. And then he doesn't take advantage, and on the next move hangs a piece and gives it to you. So, lessons to take from that. Stop with the a3, h3s. Only play those moves if they have a real purpose. A lot of people play a3 and h3 a lot of the time based on ghosts, and you don't need to. So you can leave the pawns on a3 and h3. And then you can leave them on a2 and h2. Stop moving them without a reason. Let those ghosts happen and see that they aren't any real threats. And then the next thing is, I really liked how once he came into this weak f4 square, you quickly jumped onto this d-file thing just in the nick of time. And the time was very important there, and you managed to arrange it to work out for you. So that was good. But then you needed to realize how tactically critical this position was here. In a tactically critical position, it's good to notice your own tactical weaknesses, but that shouldn't necessarily make you always play like, very feeble defensive moves. It just means the timing is super important. You got to really calculate your offensive moves and see if any of them work or not. Because if you end up playing a move like knight b1, that's often going to mean things are actually not working out for you. So you want to try pretty hard to see if you have something good with knight f7 or bishop f4 or knight c6 or something of that sort. Or knight g4 or something, right? This was another tactical possibility, opening up the queen on that and the knight on this, on the bishop. And then he gets this piece and you get this one. So you deal with your tactical problem without retreating anything, right? And now you're, perhaps still threatening things around here at some point. You've maintained your superior position basically with this trade. So yeah, so that's the second possible lesson for you from this is being more decisive in this critical phase, looking for your wins. All right. So that's it for today. That's our show.